other people just say, "Hey, God loves you," and they'll start crying, you know. So it's like he was kind of in the middle of that, but I could tell he was like he'd never heard it before, and that was like, wow, like it felt like this is why I'm here. God sent me here just for this dude, you know. So I'm telling him about like because I had my neck broken, and the doctor showed me an X-ray and said, "There's no hope." This is his exact words. He shows me the X-ray, and my neck looked like a little grenade had went off in it. He said, "There's no hope of you ever walking again." No hope. That's the words he used. There's no hope of you ever walking again. The fact that you're breathing on your own is a miracle. And then he leaves. And of course, I was like 20 at the time. And as soon as he left, I started crying like a baby because my first thought was, I'm never going to have sex again. And my mom's going to have to wipe my butt till I die. And I just started crying because like I had no hope. You know, I'm about to cry just thinking about it. But I'm laying there and I'm like, wow. And so I told him the story of that. And then, and I kept trying to move my toe because the way they had me in the bed was I could barely see my right big toe and I couldn't move anything. All I could do was blink. I couldn't, my eyes filled up with tears and I couldn't even wipe them off and I couldn't lean my head over to dump the tears out. So I'm sitting there looking through a puddle and I'm sitting there like, and it just hopeless. There was no hope. My mom walks in and she goes, "You're walking out of here in the name of Jesus." So I was like, so I had hope. Didn't have any faith, but I had hope. And before that I had no hope. So I wound up like, oh yeah, I forgot all about Jesus. You know, I was worried, you know, because I was like looking at my problem and I wasn't looking at my solution. So when she said that, she sat down and started talking to me and she knew the deal. She knew that like she's probably gonna have to wipe my butt for the rest of my life. So she's like, she'd start to cry and she's like, "I'll be right back." She didn't want me to see her crying because she wanted me to have faith. So she'd get up and leave. And she did this like 4 or 5 times. Whenever she'd leave, I'd try to move that toe and nothing happened over and over. It's like I was trying to pick up 1,000 pounds. That's what it felt like. And I'm just straining, trying to move that big toe. Nothing happened. If she comes back in, got her face cleaned up, I could tell she'd been crying, but she was trying to hide it, you know. And then that happened 3 or 4 times. She'd leave. I'd try to move it. And then when she'd come back, I was exhausted from trying to, which is weird because you're not doing anything. It was just the trying and nothing on my body. I was paralyzed from here down. Like I should have been dead. And then she'd leave and cry and then come back. And then I'd talk to her and then she'd leave. And every time she'd leave, I'd try to move that toe. And then right before, my dad was a truck driver and this was before cell phones. So like it took him a day to even find out. And then it took him a day or 2 to get there. So I don't know how long I was in a coma. It might've been 2 or 3 days. It might've been 20 minutes. I don't know, but he was out of town on the other side of the country. And when right before he got there, I started to move that toe and it moved. And I was like, and I could feel a tingling going up my leg. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, and then I started moving my foot and I was like, well, maybe I should try to move the other foot too. And it moved immediately. And then it started tingling, started going up my body. And then all of a sudden I realized that my shoulder had been hurt and I could feel my shoulder. And I was so happy to feel pain. It's weird to say that, but it wasn't it was just bruised. And I'm thinking, well, why didn't God heal that? You know, but like, I didn't care because my feet were moving, you know,
you were just happy to be able to move.
And soon as that started happening, before I even got a chance to move my arms, my dad walked in and he says, "Boy, get out of that." Because he thought I just had an insulin reaction and I'd had 100 of them. So this was nothing new. He was like, he was mad. You wasted my time. I could have caught a load back and I had to deadhead back, losing money. He was mad, you know, and I'm in here spending $20,000 a day on this motel or this hospital room. You know, so he walks in, "Get out of that bed. We're leaving." He comes up, just yanks the IV out. You know, he was mad. He's like, "Boy, get out of that bed." And I just jumped up and he says, "I'm going to get your clothes. We're leaving." So he left and got me some clothes and I put them on. And as I'm putting them on, the doctor walks in. And it was like a student hospital, you know, it was like a college kind of deal.
Yeah.
And so the doctor walks in with the x-ray and I'm over here to his left and he's holding the x-ray up in the air, like over his head. And he walks in and doesn't even look at me, but he's pointing at the x-ray and he's telling all of his students. And there's this really hot little blonde chick who was like my age, you know, and I'm sitting here thinking, hey, like I got a chance now, you know, like, of course, you know, when you're 20, 21, you know, like anyway, but so he walks in, holds the x-ray up and he's sitting there pointing at it. And he's like, he was like, when the L2 or what, I don't remember. It was like a bunch of big doctor words. I didn't understand half of what he said, but I kind of got the gist of it. He's like, look, when you got a situation like that, don't beat around the bush. Don't try to be nice. It's not your job. You need to tell them that there's no hope of them ever walking again because it's going to take them some time to wrap their mind around it. So you want to hit them with it right away. Don't try to be nice. You're not here to be their friend. You're here to be their doctor. In a situation, as you can all see, this guy will never walk again. And that hot little girl looks over and sees me put my shoes on. So she looks back at him like, and then she started doing this like, I don't understand. Is this a test? Like she was confused because he's saying one thing and then she's looking at something else. And she's like, she held her little pen like she had her hand on her and she just kept. And then he noticed that the hot chick wasn't paying attention to him. So he saw her looking over there and he looks up at me and his jaw dropped. And he never took, the funny thing was the whole time he was in the room, he never brought the x-ray back down because he was holding it up against the light and his jaw dropped. And he stood there with his mouth open, didn't breathe for like 60 whole seconds. And he just stood there and stared at me. And finally he kind of like, and he looks at the x-ray and looks at me and did that about 4 or 5 times. And then he looks at the bottom corner and looks at my clipboard to make sure he had the right room. And he went back and forth about 4 or 5 times. And then he never shut his mouth. His mouth was hanging open. And he never put the x-ray down. And he finally just stood there with his mouth open and he had this look on his face like, and he backs out of the room and like in total shock. Like it broke his brain.
Yeah.
You know, and my it's like, we got to go. So when I walked out of the emergency room, it was a neurological intensive care. When I walked out, every nurse in there had her mouth open, staring at me like, because I was a young guy, just broke my neck, you know, like every one of them in there felt sorry for me. Poor guy, you know, every one of them was like, oh, that poor guy. They probably went home, told their family, this poor guy, 20 years old, cute little guy. He's probably, you know, that his life's over. And so when I walked down there's one on my left. When I walked out, there was a couple behind the desk and they just stood there and stared at me with their mouth open. And like, I wish I had a phone then because the video would have been amazing. But like when I walked out, every single one of them stared at me like, this is impossible.
Yeah, no, that's miraculous. How did I may have missed it. I think you mentioned it. How did you break your neck? How did you end up there?
Well, that's the part of the story. It's God told me not to go to a prayer meeting. Okay.
Mm.
Strange, right? God would never tell you not to go to a prayer meeting, right?
You would think.
So you would think, you know. So I called my friend. It was at his house. Actually, when I told you about the Bible study I'm going to, his widow is coming to give me a ride. So, like, I'm still connected with those people. Anyway, I called Scott and I was like, hey, man, God told me not to come to a prayer meeting. He's like, there's no way God would tell you. That's the devil trying to lie to you, man. And God's got big things that are going to happen tonight. You got to be there. We've been like, you know, the fire of God shows up every time we get together. Don't you dare miss this. He's like, do you really think God would tell you not to go to a prayer meeting? And I was like, man, I don't know. God would never tell me that. He was like, well, you better be there, man, or I'm going to come get you myself. And I was like, yeah, you're right. So I went to the prayer meeting and it was like the worst prayer meeting we'd ever had. It was like God wasn't nowhere to, because normally it was like you could feel the presence of God, the peace, the fire, the love. You were almost drunk with his presence at every prayer meeting we ever had. Almost not every, but almost every one we ever had. It was amazing. It was like almost like a drug, you know, but we're all sitting there looking at each other like, who's in sin? Like somebody here sinning because like you couldn't feel God's presence. And it was weird because normally you could feel his presence and everybody's looking around like something's wrong. Like, and everybody's like, I don't know what. And I thought, well, maybe that's why God told me not to go because, you know, it was kind of a bad deal, you know, bad session.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right. So I got in my truck and I'm going down. There's it's over by Irwin High School. It's Roller Coaster Road, but there's a road on the side of it that's a roller coaster. And all I remember is shifting into fourth. And then I woke up in the hospital like 2 or 3 days later because I take insulin shots and I'd taken too much. I didn't eat enough. And I just passed out. And God knew that was going to happen, so he tried to warn me.
He didn't.
But I didn't listen. So that's why when I went to the Capitol, I was well suited to be there because God had told me to do crazy things before. And when I didn't obey him, I wound up paralyzed. You know what I'm saying? So like he knew so when he said when he told me to climb the stairs, I was like, I argued with him. I was like, I've had all the protesting. I'm done. I've already been shot in the face. This is not what I came here for. But he's like, you said you would obey me. And I was like, yeah, I did. You're right. So I wound up obeying him, but because his plans for me are better than my plans for me. And I knew that I just need to do what he told me, you know?
Yeah.
So